Welcome to Life Stories, where we share inspiring tales of resilience, transformation, and the hidden treasures in life. Today's story begins with an unexpected inheritance, a seemingly worthless farm left to Emily Harper after the tragic loss of her parents. Mocked by her family and overlooked her entire life, Emily embarks on a journey to uncover the secrets buried beneath the soil. What she finds not only changes her life but challenges everything she thought she knew about herself and her worth. Stay tuned for today's story. And don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories to join us on this incredible journey. My name is Emily Harper, and this is the story of how an abandoned farm turned me from the family disappointment into someone my greedy relatives could no longer ignore. Sometimes, the greatest treasures are hidden in places others consider worthless. I still remember the day of the will reading as if it were yesterday. The air in the mahogany-paneled law office felt heavy, almost suffocating, as if the very walls were pressing in on me. I sat quietly in a corner, feeling out of place among my polished and self-assured family. My sister Madison looked every bit the image of confidence. Her blonde hair perfectly styled, her designer bracelet glinting under the light. Aunt Linda, the family matriarch since our parents passed away, was already whispering to Madison about their plans for the inheritance. The tragic car accident that had taken both my parents had left us reeling. But this gathering wasn't about grief, it was about division. And not just of assets, but of worth. I braced myself as Mr. Harrison, our longtime family lawyer, adjusted his glasses and began reading from the document that would determine all our futures. To our beloved daughter Madison, Mr. Harrison intoned, "We leave our investment portfolio, the family mansion in Connecticut, and all liquid assets." A satisfied smile spread across Madison's face. It wasn't smug, it was triumphant. This was what she had expected. After all, Madison had always been the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. The one who had effortlessly charmed her way into every social circle and business opportunity. And to Emily, Mr. Harrison continued, his voice softening slightly, "We leave Harper Farm in Wyoming, including all structures and contents." There was silence, heavy and uncomfortable. And then, Madison burst into laughter. "A farm," she sneered, her bracelet jingling as she waved dismissively. "Oh, this is just perfect. Little Emily always did prefer dirt to diamonds." My face burned. But I said nothing. Harper Farm. I had heard of it in passing, 200 acres of overgrown fields and an old barn that hadn't been touched in decades. Grandpa Henry's farm. The one my father had always called a money pit. It was abandoned and forgotten. Just like me. There must be some mistake. Aunt Linda interjected, her face pinched with a mixture of concern and disbelief. Richard and Margaret would never leave Emily with just dirt. But Mr. Harrison shook his head firmly. "The will is quite clear. Harper Farm, including all structures and contents, belongs to Emily." Madison stood up, smoothing her tailored dress as if brushing off the absurdity of the situation. "Well, Emily," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy, "enjoy your barns and chickens. If you ever need a loan, you know where to find me. After all, what's family for?" She paused, her smile sharpening. "Don't get lost in the fields." Her words stung. But they didn't surprise me. This had always been my role in the family, to be the one overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. I left the law office that day with a single manila envelope containing the deed to Harper Farm and a set of keys that felt heavier than they should have. My heart was a tangled mess of emotions, hurt, anger, and something else I couldn't quite name yet. The next day, I drove out to Wyoming, the envelope sitting on the passenger seat like an unwelcome passenger. As I approached the property, my first thought was that Madison was right, it did look like a lost cause. The farmhouse, once a proud two-story structure, was weathered and worn, its paint peeling like old wallpaper. The fields were wild and overgrown, a chaotic sea of weeds. But it was the barn that caught my attention. The barn stood tall and defiant against the backdrop of the mountains. Grandpa Henry had spent his final years here, tinkering with inventions and projects that no one else seemed to understand. I had vague memories of following him into that barn as a child, of his kind eyes and the way he would whisper, "This is our little secret." Dad had always dismissed Grandpa as a dreamer, a man who had wasted his genius on a piece of land that would never amount to anything. "Henry Harper lost his mind out there," he would say, shaking his head. But as I stood before the barn, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was holding on to something important. The barn door groaned in protest as I pushed it open, sunlight filtering through the gaps in the wooden walls. Inside, decades of neglect were evident, cobwebs hung like curtains, and rusting farm equipment sat forgotten in the corners. Yet, something about the space felt off. The dimensions didn't quite match the exterior. A memory surfaced, Grandpa's voice. Low and conspiratorial, 3 taps on the north wall. Then the 4th board from the bottom. My hands trembled as I followed the long-forgotten pattern. The moment I tapped the last board, there was a faint click, and a section of the wall swung inward. Behind it was a staircase descending into darkness. I hesitated, my heart pounding. Was this a mistake? Or had Grandpa left something behind? Something meant for me alone? With my phone's flashlight illuminating the way, I took a deep breath and stepped inside. As I reached the bottom, the beam of light swept across the room, revealing a sight that made my breath catch. Detailed geological surveys and mining charts covered the walls, their precision almost hypnotic. In the center of the room sat a lab, preserved under layers of dust but unmistakably sophisticated. And in the corner, a heavy safe. The combination was my birthday. Grandpa Henry had never forgotten it. Even in his final days. My hands shook as I turned the dial. Inside the safe was a leather-bound journal and a USB drive. The journal's first page held a simple inscription, "To Emily," the only one who ever bothered to listen. Tears filled my eyes as I flipped through the pages, each one brimming with notes, calculations, and sketches. Grandpa hadn't lost his mind. He had made a discovery that could reshape industries and change lives. The worthless farm wasn't worthless at all. Beneath its soil lay one of the largest rare earth element deposits in North America, along with a groundbreaking extraction process that was both efficient and environmentally friendly. My mind raced as I realized what this meant. The farm wasn't just valuable, it was a treasure trove. But if Madison or Aunt Linda found out, they'd stop at nothing to take it from me. I would have to be careful, methodical, and above all, quiet. And so, with Grandpa's journal in one hand and a fire ignited in my heart, I made a silent promise: I would honor his legacy. What everyone else saw as worthless, I would turn into something extraordinary. I spent that first night on the farm unable to sleep. The house creaked and groaned under the weight of its years. But it wasn't the eerie sounds of the old place that kept me awake. It was the journal lying on the bedside table, illuminated by the faint glow of my phone's flashlight. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the intricate diagrams, the bold sketches, the notes written in my grandfather's precise handwriting. Each word, each calculation seemed to whisper a message: this is bigger than you can imagine. By morning, I knew what I had to do. Grandpa Henry's vision wasn't just about science, it was about belief, his belief in me. For most of my life, I had felt like the shadow in someone else's story. Madison had always been the one to shine, and I had learned to fade into the background. But standing in the living room of that forgotten farmhouse, I realized that Grandpa had seen something in me no one else had. Before I could act, I needed to understand. Armed with coffee and determination, I spent hours poring over the journal. The details were staggering: maps of the land showing mineral-rich veins crisscrossing beneath the farm, pages explaining his environmentally friendly extraction process, and even early drafts of patent filings. Grandpa had been meticulous. He'd planned for this, planned for me to be the one to discover it. The USB drive was the key to unlocking it all. I plugged it into my laptop, holding my breath as a folder sprang to life. Inside were hundreds of files, engineering blueprints, legal documents, and even correspondence drafts addressed to future partners. He had been preparing for years, waiting for the right moment and, I now understood, the right person. But as much as this discovery thrilled me, it terrified me too. My family had always underestimated me, and I had long since learned to accept their dismissiveness as inevitable. But this was no small secret. If they found out about the treasure hidden beneath the farm, they'd tear me apart. Madison would hire an army of lawyers. Aunt Linda would rally every connection she had. I would lose everything before I even had a chance to begin. I needed to protect this, not just for me, but for Grandpa's legacy. I decided to start small. I spent the next few days cleaning out the barn and reorganizing the hidden lab. Every corner of that underground room felt like an extension of Grandpa's mind, brilliant, curious, and full of potential. There was an almost reverent quality to the space, as if it had been waiting for me all these years. The lab became my sanctuary. I dusted off the old testing equipment, catalogued the geological samples he'd left behind, and compiled a list of questions to guide my next steps. And then I made 3 phone calls. The first was to a patent lawyer, the second to a mining engineer, and the third to an investment banker I had met during my short-lived career in finance, a career my family had always dismissed as unsuitable. Each conversation started the same way: "What I'm about to show you must stay confidential. I'm sitting on something that could change everything." To my surprise, they didn't laugh or question my competence. Instead, they listened. The mining engineer, Dr. Callahan, was especially fascinated. "If what you're describing is accurate," he said, his voice tinged with excitement, "your grandfather's process could revolutionize the industry. Do you realize how big this is?" I did. And yet, I also didn't. The scale of it was overwhelming. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. This wasn't just about proving my family wrong or making a fortune. It was about honoring the faith Grandpa had placed in me and doing something that truly mattered. The farm, once a symbol of mockery and neglect, was slowly transforming into something new. I modernized the lab with the help of Dr. Callahan's guidance, sourcing equipment from discreet suppliers to avoid raising suspicion. The barn's weathered exterior remained untouched, a deliberate choice to keep prying eyes away. But its interior was becoming a command center for innovation. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments when doubt crept in, whispering that I wasn't strong enough, smart enough, or capable enough to handle this. I'd find myself staring at Madison's social media posts, pictures of her luxurious vacations, her glittering charity galas, her endless stream of successes, and I'd wonder if maybe everyone had been right about me all along. Maybe I was the girl who didn't deserve more than dirt. But then I'd think of Grandpa's journal. The words he'd written for me, to Emily, the only one who ever bothered to listen, were more than just a compliment. They were a challenge. A call to rise above the noise and doubt and become the person he had believed I could be. And so, I kept going. Each late night spent studying his notes. Each meeting with my small, trusted team. Each step toward bringing his vision to life was a step away from the shadows and toward something brighter. I wasn't just discovering the potential of the farm, I was discovering the potential within myself. By the end of that first month, the lab was fully operational, and the first patent applications were ready to be filed. It was only the beginning, but it was enough to spark a fire in me that couldn't be extinguished. Grandpa had once told me that sometimes, the most valuable treasures are hidden in places no one else bothers to look. He had been right about the farm and about me. In the end, the abandoned farm that once seemed like a cruel joke turned out to be the greatest gift of all. It wasn't just about the wealth buried beneath the soil or the success of Harper Sustainable Resources, it was about the journey, the lessons, And the legacy left by Grandpa Henry. I learned that true value isn't in what you inherit, but in what you create. It's about seeing potential where others see none. About believing in yourself when no one else does. Today, the old farm stands as a testament to resilience and vision. Its once empty fields are thriving. And the barn remains untouched, a reminder of the man who saw beyond appearances. Thank you for listening to my story. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to Life Stories for more inspiring tales of growth, love, and resilience. See you in the next video.